sharing. Welcome to the guide room. I'm Julia. I'm the chief guide over here at the SoHAD, the School of Spirituality, Healing and Development. I'm here today with some of the SoHAD Wise Guides. Deborah, would you like to say hello?
Hello, Borada.
B.
Hello.
And Christina.
Hello.
So today we're going to be talking about listening and the place from where we listen. And when we listen, what is it that we actually hear? But before we get going, we always do a short protocol. And today we're just going to start that with a puli, a prayer. Halani, do you feel inspired out there in nature to do a puli?
Absolutely. Okay, puli kako, prayer for everyone. Na akua, na amakua, e poe kahiko. Mahalo and aloha na akua. We ask for your presence here today while the wise guides gather, preparing for our discussion about listening. And as we talk to you as the ancestors, we already know that's a special channel that we have, that we prepare for with you. Even in this prayer, we know that you are listening to us. We ask that you protect us from the kolohe and the kepalo, from their prying eyes and ears, and allow the message and the discussion of the wise guides today to go to the eyes and ears of who needs it most, and help this along its way. A mahalo you, a mahalo for all the wise guides together. And we're also a special thank you for the SoHAD for preparing this platform so that everybody can take what they want and need at any given special time. And I'd send this prayer to you, Na'akua, with the ancient and traditional words that have been handed down for 51 generations. E amama, e amama, e amama, mahalo Na'akua.
Mahalo Na'akua. Mahalo, Halani, Deborah. I'm really loving, I don't know whether that was your birds behind you that were twittering away, but there's some right outside my window that were just completely...
All I could hear was the birds. It's like, do they not get what this subject's about? You're meant to be listening, not talking.
Oh, I was thinking, well, what can I hear with my ones? Like, what are they actually indicating to me? You know, what's that line of communication going? Wow.
I thought I was in a Hitchcock movie about 5 minutes before we opened, because they were all lining up. And I was like, okay, I'm not Tippi Hedren. I'm not in the movie.
So that was a really lovely pule and mahalo of that special moment. So today's topic is about listening, and it's about understanding where do we listen from, and when we are listening, what are we actually hearing? This topic came up from our last discussion, which was about getting stuck and what happens when we get stuck and what takes us into that place of stuckness and how to move out of it. And so as we had that discussion last time, this was one of the key components, which was about listening. And of course, in our traditional training and in our school, in our, well, in two of the schools actually, but particularly in the School of Hawaiian Spiritual Studies, listening is one of the key skills that we train ourselves and our students in. So does anyone feel compelled or inspired to start the conversation?
I'm happy to kick it off. And I'm not trained in the School of Spirituality, of Hawaiian Spirituality, so I'm going to come at this from an interpersonal perspective, from a communication perspective, from a human psychology perspective. And I guess fundamentally, communication and how we listen, I mean, what we say and how we listen are all important fundamentals in terms of building that deeper intimacy. And where we listen from plays a really, really big part in nurturing close connections and understanding between people. None of us like to be not heard or to be misheard or to even be corrected that we've used one word when we could have used another. So I think it's really important for us to listen to somebody's intention. And that doesn't mean that we're not careful about our words. I'm not actually saying that we shouldn't be careful about how we speak, because that is very, very important. But I think it's also important for us to consider, do we listen for the intention, or are we listening at the words and ready to jump in and defend because we're listening from a place of prejudice or a place of, I already know better. And when we operate from that, rather than actually listening for understanding and meaning, that's when we start to get ourselves into trouble. So I think this listening piece and understanding where you listen from, are you listening for the intention, or are you listening to catch someone out, to prove them wrong, to show them that you know more? That doesn't build communication and doesn't build, intimacy and stronger relationships. So yeah, it's more around the intention. I think for me, and I get caught in this all the time. I've had many instances, and I catch myself where I'm kind of going, yeah, I know what you're going to say. I know what you're going to say. And the other person says to me, actually, can you let me finish speaking, because you don't know what I'm going to say. So there's lots of aspects to this, and we need to really catch ourselves and give the other person space to speak, and for us to truly listen for what is being said, not what we think is being said.
Mm.
Yeah, I think truly listening is one of the greatest gifts we can give, but also the most powerful tool in helping people to through difficult times. You know, sometimes it's not about solving a problem. Sometimes it's just about sitting there with that person and truly listening. And like you're saying, you know, it's not just the words. It's like reading a book, I guess. You can just read the words, but the story is in between the lines. It's in that energy. It's in what is built through the different layers of unfolding the story. And I think it's very similar in our conversation, at least if there's a quite logical conversation. You know, you're in school and the teacher might say, how much is 1 + 1? And there's only one answer to it, and that's about it. So that's a quite logical approach and a clinically sort of a communication, I think. But once it comes to relationships, it becomes far more complex, because it's not just a back and forth conversation. It's about what is triggered in you while you hear what you are receiving, and from what place are you then answering, and what might you then trigger in that other person through what you have just communicated in your words that are already maybe loaded or maybe full of fear or pain, or so it can become quite messy. And in these situations, sitting back listening can be very powerful. I experienced that in my separation. We had times when we went camping and just sat around the campfire, and it was nearly like it wasn't something agreed on, but it came something like a truth speaking. And we would sit in front of that fire and we would just speak, and we both had our own truth in that separation. You know, that was my story and there was his stories. And if we wouldn't have had that space where we just spoke our truth, no matter how hurtful that might have been for the other person, but for the other person also to hear that, I wonder if we would have been able to be, or, you know, become these friends that we are today.
So B, what skills do you think you drew on to be able to listen? Because it was a very painful period. And I think for our audience, our listeners out there, the most challenging time to really listen is when you're hurting. That's one of the hardest times.
Yeah.
So what skills did you draw on, B, or what were you mindful of or conscious of to stay in love and to listen for the intention rather than to go for the jugular? Because it's really easy just to go
It's so difficult to explain, because these conversations would never unfold that way in other scenarios. There was something about sitting nearly like that sacred fire and just being out in nature in you know, on a starry night. So that whole setup around that holding in that already was something that brought a different energy. And then it was a curiosity that came in all of that as well. It was past that point where I needed to be right or tell him how much he had hurt me or all of that. It was at a point where it was like, how was it actually for him? You know, I know my story and all of that, but how was it actually for him? How did he experience all of that? So that curiosity, I think, in all of that as well. But yeah, it's difficult to put that in words because I was lucky it unfolded.
So that's a really important skill. What you've picked on there is one of the really important skills, which is being able to look at it from your perspective, but also being able to look at it from the other's perspective. And then there's a third potential way where you look at it from a fly on the wall or a greater perspective. But that actually takes a level of calmness and compassion to be able to do that. So that empathy piece, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, is actually one of the really important skills for effective listening.
Yeah. And a sort of a detachment of that other person needing to say something that satisfies your story and your experience. You know, you have to detach yourself from that and be just really curious and open in what was it actually for that person? You know, how did that person experience that? Yes, I thought he or she experienced it that way or whatever, but let me sit back and let me actually take in how did that person see that and travel through that and experience that. And it's sometimes mind-blowing because it can be so different to what you experience. Like you both experienced the same scenario, but yet it was a completely different, it's the same scenario, but a different experience. Same like with my siblings, you know, there was things in our upbringing that might have been challenging, and it took years for us to talk about that. And we say, oh, remember when this and this happened? And my brother or sister would have a completely different recollection from that experience. And you go like, wow, that is incredible.
And that happens all the time.
Yeah.
In so many conversations,
yeah.
so many interactions.
And that's where misunderstandings often come from. Yeah.
I'd love to hear about the Hawaiian teachings around effective listening. We can't hear you, Julia. I can't hear you.
I'm actually aware that Deborah wants to speak.
Sorry,
because I'm listening.
Because that was a really interesting conversation, and what was coming up for me right from the beginning of the conversation was context, right? The context of our relationships and our conversations that we're having in I know if I started having a conversation with my friend since 11 years old, and I started really active listening, she'd be asking what was wrong with me, right? Because we have a relationship of how, now I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I do want to kind of lay it on the table for people that listening in context of the relationship and in the situation you're having can change. I also kind of like thought about the corporate environment where I would say predominantly the listening is coming from ego, right? And like it's a beautiful example scenario where everybody is waiting to talk, and in the corporate, because I experience it often in corporate world, you get people saying, I hear you, and sometimes you just want to cringe when you, because if you're witnessing, like, well, I don't think you did hear that. And then you go into judgment, and ego just promotes the non-listening activities. I'm not going to jump into the Hawaiian way of listening because I'll let Julia say about that. What I do know from lots of personal development, if you're really truly listening, you're not sitting in ego. And when you were describing your conversation about very much the environment was being set, it felt like the environment was being set because we put ourselves in a position to want to listen.
Yeah, that's
Because
true.
if we want to listen, we will.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times an environment allows us to glide into that position of wanting to listen. So that's why I thought was really, really interesting, because when you said, I don't know why, and I think, well, I think what I heard was you put yourself into a position to listen. Whether you did it intuitively or logically did it, you were guided yourself, you were in that position.
I think there was also a certain safety for me in that setting up. I feel really comfortable in nature, and there's a real holding for me in nature. Would I have been sitting in a boardroom and have that same situation, which is completely out of my comfort zone, just to name something now, it would have probably been a completely different situation and conversation. So I think it has a lot to do as well in the environment. You have that conversation if you really truly want to listen. There's so many other conversations we have to have in all kind of settings, but if there's an important conversation to be had, it might also be interesting to be mindful about the environment you set that conversation in.
Yeah. I'm going to let Julia talk about, because I'm absolutely being guided towards how through the Hawaiian spirituality school, how we're taught and how very effective it is. And I'd rather let Julia talk about that one. So I'm going to mute because there's a background noise.
I don't even want to go to that level at the moment, because as I listen to what's being shared and put different perspectives, and that's why these conversations are helpful and effective and juicy, I would like to wind back a little bit, and I think I've got 3 big questions. And the first question I have is, what is listening? Like, what is it? Because if you flip through, Amazon, all the books, or, Sounds True, or any of those repositories of information, there's a whole bunch of stuff around listening. But I'm really interested to hear what is listening. Because, you're asking about how we're trained and how we train people. This is really part of our beginning part of training. What is listening? Hit me up.
I think some of the elements of listening is to be present for another without judgment and without letting our own story and prejudices and insecurities and whatever other adjectives we want to put around that get in the way. So it's about being present and open to hear what is being said.
Yeah.
With an open heart.
And yes to all of that. And I think there's also layers to it. There's the words, there's a body language, there's an energy, there's, a little twitch or a little change of body language can give away sometimes so much more than the words themselves. So
tone of
yeah,
voice.
tone, what place it comes from, the words come from, and it's very multi-layered. In fact, I would be interested to hear your take on it, Julia, because it is a very interesting conversation. I've never consciously thought about it that way myself. So
I'm going to ask Deborah, in the Druid school, in the Welsh Druid school, what is the teaching around listening, Deborah?
The teaching around listening for the Druids really is to be present with yourself, first and foremost. Right? You have to be present. You're not being present for another. You're being present for yourself. And another person is not the context of listening for the Druids. So the Druids are like, you be present for yourself first and foremost. Let me know if there's some background noise, because there's a boat being pulled out the ramp. We'll let that just go. So when you sit with yourself, and you can hear yourself. You listen to yourself and you hear yourself. Then you can listen to what is person, a tree. The Druids is a tree. The Drew is a Welsh word for oak. So you listen to the trees. So you're listening for everything around you and within you, because what's within you is outside of you. So for the Druids, you start with, you come to yourself, you listen to yourself, what's going on with you, and what's going on with what's around you.
And do you have, you know, if we get granular with listening from that Celtic, but particularly the Welsh perspective, but Celtic, what do they say listening is?
I don't articulate listening is listening. So listening is a part of your movement through life. Right? You got, because anything in your environment, talking about B's environment, anything in your environment is telling you about your environment, and should you be there in your environment. Sometimes you listen and get told by nature, particularly, get out. So listening is about all your senses being alive and awake to the messages that you're going to receive, for the purpose of receiving those messages. If that's the way I can explain it.
So here's my second big question, right? If that's what you know, three perspectives on and listening is, that's listening, then what's hearing? What is hearing? Are they two separate things? Are they somehow slightly different, or maybe very different? What's hearing? Like you just said, Deborah, we hear people, or people say, I hear you, or I just want to be heard. But actually, what is hearing as opposed to listening? And maybe it's not any different. I'm curious.
I think there's possibly a subtle thing when you're hearing, you're listening more. When you're hearing, you're listening for meaning. Otherwise, it's just words. You can, and I'm not sure whether I'm using the word listen and hear in the right way now, right? Because we can hear a lot of noise, but are we hearing the noise, or are we listening for the meaning?
So for me, that's very anatomical. So hearing is a very anatomy thing. It's all about, there's a device here, and I'm absorbing something, and then there's something in there that tunes it into something, and my brain works it out. But for listening comes like from more than the ear. And so, and they could be a swap, and they could be the same word, and we're just not used to using it in that context, right? But hearing for me is very anatomical. I'm getting my words mixed up. It's about your ear.
And there seems to be nearly like an inquiry in listening, like you can hear something, but with a deeper inquiry, you're actually listening to all of that. Like that's just what comes up. Again, I haven't really thought that deeply about that question before, so it's something to ponder really about, but a very, like, really interesting to approach it that way. But yeah, that is for me present. It's like there's an inquiry nearly in listening. It's more than just hearing it, but there's an inquiry for something deeper, maybe hidden in all of that as well.
And I think habitually we tend to listen to what we think is going to be said. We don't listen for the meaning, because we're so caught up in our own little first person world often that we don't actually stop to take in the meaning, the intention, what's behind it. We're busy in our own little world. And yes, to your point, Deborah, that the point you made around you can't listen effectively until you can listen to yourself. You use different language, but and I think that's really, really important, because unless you're conscious of what's going on in your head and what you're hearing in your head, unless you can quieten those voices and have some discipline over what's going on in your own head because of all your own stuff, let's keep it simple, you'll be challenged to truly listen to another. So I completely agree with you that mastery of self is the first important piece in being able to truly listen to another and have them feel heard.
Can I ask big question number 3?
Do I win a prize?
We'll spin the wheel. So we talked about what is listening. We talked about what is hearing. So when we say, and where do you listen from, what does that actually mean? Where is from?
I think for me, from is, for me, from is another place other than our ego and our stuff. So are you listening from your heart? Are you listening from your intention? Or are you listening from your stuff, from your story, from your... That's part of the discipline piece.
For a Druid, you listen from every sense that you can acknowledge and open, every sense. You know, go beyond the 5 senses if you can, but you listen from a place of sense, your senses, which is not necessarily your ears.
And that's exactly that. You know, you can only pick up intention and meaning if you're doing exactly what you've described. You need to be looking in tune energetically. These are skills, right? These are skills. And they're skills that can be learnt. We can all learn these skills. So you're absolutely right, Deb, because if you're just listening for words, you miss so much of the meaning and so much of the intention. You know, we've all had situations when you've said to a friend, how are you? And they go, I'm all right. I mean, everything's okay. And you know darn well everything's not okay. If you just were listening to the words, you wouldn't respond in a caring way. And that's a really simple example. So you're absolutely spot on. You've got to engage all your senses, your knowing, your intuition, so much more. Draw on your guidance, your higher knowing, to listen for more than the spoken word.
It's really all about layers again, isn't it? It's all these layers that are in the listening, in the speaking, and I'm still pondering about the place from where I'm listening. So that's still something I'm sitting with, but it seems to be all, there's so many layers to all of it. And that's like the skill as well, is to really be in the world, observing all of these layers in not just your conversations and your answerings, but just with being in the world, whether that's going for a walk or just sitting here on my chair. It's like being present to all of these layers, and that might not make much sense at the moment, but it's just, you know, just sitting with it, what I'm feeling into at the moment. There are big questions to ask without preparation, Miss Julia. But
we don't have preparation for listening. That's not how life works. Like, boom, bam, all of a sudden we're in an interaction. You know, we don't have enough time to go, hang on a minute, I'll just get out my listening manual. Oh, it's on page 34 at paragraph 2. I'll be right back.
But this is why doing the work on yourself, and understanding yourself is so critical to all of this.
Bam, that's it.
It is so critical, because until we have self-awareness, back to Deborah's point, until we know self, we cannot know or lead or support another. Whether it's business, whether it's friendship, we have to have knowledge and discipline of self and train ourselves if we've got into bad habits around how we listen and where we listen from,
Mm.
we need to catch ourselves. We need to retrain ourselves.
Or just train ourselves, because we've
Or
never
just train ourselves, full stop.
never had the training. Yeah.
And I'm not even sure if it is training or if it is, if you go completely back, if it is just a remembering. It's more so a dismantling of what we have been taught. That's what's coming up for me at the moment. Yeah.
This is what I will put forward around something about, the things that I've heard, I've heard you say. And where I'm with that is hearing has a physical aspect to it. You hear something, it's physical, it's transactional. What happens when you listen, it's actually a process of, it can be a process of transformation, because it's another level to that. In our teachings, what we are taught to do and what the kupuna, the elders, mastered, often you'll hear people say, our ancestors, our kupuna mastered silence. Because the elders don't speak at all unless they have something really important to say. But what we're taught to do is to understand what's in the not saying. Because they didn't master silence. They mastered listening. And they mastered through listening, mastered of what we sometimes refer to as the space. So, the spaces between words, the spaces between sentences. If we're reading a book, the space between each line of that paragraph, they mastered what was in there. And it's to the same or similar, well, it is the same teaching that Deborah was talking about from the Welsh Druid training. It's about the movement. They mastered understanding what all the vibration of movement meant between the spaces in the context, which is what you were saying, Debs, of everything else that was happening around. So listening wasn't just, bam, I hear thunder. Is what else? That's the question, what else? And so that's where we're taught and we're trained to train ourselves. And it's an ongoing, continual process to listen to these, they're like fine lines of, hair's breadth of everything that we can understand that's in that space, which is what Deborah said, it's all of and what you were saying, it's all of those senses. Each one of those has to be awakened. And not only do they have to be awakened, they have to move into alignment, because otherwise it's skewiff again. And that's where all that, entanglement and getting mixed up.
Misinterpretation.
Exactly. Because you're having, you're out of alignment talking to somebody else who's out of alignment. Okay, your recipe for disaster. Exactly. So, that's what they mastered. And they mastered communication and the movement of communication without words. And today, people call that telepathy or whatever, but they didn't give things names for it. That's just how they communicated. And that's how they communicated over vast distances. And that's what we're trained to do. To communicate with no words, but to be able to communicate and relate, more importantly, because for us, communication is only one tiny little sliver of this thing we call communication. But we're taught to place ourselves there and then move from that place. Because when people, which is what we've been talking about, and we were talking about this yesterday in our Luna Ho'oponopono training about truth. And our response to different things is because of people. We don't understand people. We don't understand people in situations. And we particularly don't understand people in situations where they are getting triggered by their stuff, which in turn connects to our stuff, and we get triggered too. Then it becomes one, I don't understand what's going on here. And I don't even understand why you're speaking so unkindly and calling me names. I don't even know why you're doing that, because like, hey, I'm a good person. Why can't you see that? And so what happens most of the time is when people are listening and when they are speaking, they're speaking from what we call their pohaku, their stones, or in modern words, their baggage that's unresolved. That's the filter that it's going through, which is why doing your inner work is 100% the top of the list, because you can't get to where Deborah was talking about, where the Druids and their way of communicating and interacting with the cosmos. You cannot get there. Right? When people, we were talking about this yesterday, when people talk about, well, I'm speaking my truth, most times what people are doing is speaking the truth of their experience, which is not the truth, because the truth is what we were just talking about. Everything has to be in alignment. And again, that's where things become very, very entangled. And so it ends up in this transactional exchange that, can blow up and be quite hurtful. And so when you talk to me about how are we trained in a Hawaiian lineage, that's how we're trained. We're trained to not say anything. And quite often in these conversations, when I've heard each of you say to me, well, you're not saying anything, that's because I'm moving. I'm in the movement. And so, that's our perspective on where we listen from, is if we do not do our inner work, we are always going to be listening, communicating through our pohaku. And we call that kanikani, K-A-N-I, which is chatter. And Kumar Lawrence says, all we're doing when we speak in that unconsidered way, or we listen in that unconsidered way, is adding to the oral rubbish in the universe. I mean, I loved it when he explained that way, because that's exactly what does happen.
And it's not just humans. It's not just humans that chatter and gossip.
Exactly. But he's talking about, when people are speaking from their
Ego.
or listening from that thing. Because the other thing that happens in today's world is, it's how with, everything's so high volume, and so everything's rushed through, is that people only read, the first sort of 100 or 50 or 80 characters, and they okay, get what that's about. Then they read across to the last bit and go, okay, that plus that equals that. It's like the F shape. That's how people read. That's how people think they know what's going, what they're reading, or then that's the way that they're attributing meaning, but they're not. And that's the way social media, that's why I think, on those Instagram and all that, you only have something like 125 characters with your caption, as your caption, for that exact reason.
So we're not listening for understanding. We're not listening for understand. We're not listening for understanding. We're listening to confirm our own biases, or to confirm our own prejudices. Or we're listening from our wounded child, to use another frame to describe what you were just talking about. We're listening from our wounded child.
We just want the bite, and that's it.
Exactly. And then, that kind of what do you call it? Edited way of, or, speed listening, if you want to call it that. It's so detrimental to what people, especially in COVID times, say they're craving, which is relationship. And what it creates is a very emotionally immature society. And to me, that's what's really frightening. And I think as healers, when people come to us for healing work, when they say, I just want someone to listen to me, of course, they want someone to be fully present because they can't be. But that's our job. That's our job, is to be continually working on leading the way, showing the way. You can be unencumbered by stuff. It is achievable. We all have to work on it, each one of us.
It's a daily discipline, speaking from experience. And a commitment to growth. You need to be committed to a growth mindset.
Yeah.
Well, this is the
it's
other
ever
thing.
present.
This is the other thing we were talking about in our class yesterday, and it was about what are you actually, maybe this is another topic. What are you actually committed to? Because you cannot say I'm committed to doing my inner work, but the shape of my life is it's a shambles. So clearly I'm not committed to my inner work. So that was a big conversation we were having in class yesterday, a really big conversation.
And how our old habit can influence that. The habit can override what you're doing with your inner work. You can get so far, but it's still an old pattern can kick in.
Unconscious.
Very interesting.
And sometimes you have to ride into the dumps of aspects in your life and in this world, because that's where you actually come back with these gifts to then truly sit with somebody, whether that is grief or whether that is anger or whether that is whatever it is. But as further as you have entered into that domain and experienced it, and that comes with being messy at times as well, or completely being dismantled in that whole thing. But then you will come back, and then you can sit with somebody that is entering that passageway because you've been there. So you are not scared anymore to sit with that person in their entirety of their grief or their whatever experience that is. So I think it is also just as important to not be completely together all the time, because that's how life teaches you and molds you and shapes you, and yeah.
And I also think that's part of the process, to come and to go, to ebb and to flow, right?
The circle, yeah.
Part of the process is moving away from your therapist to come back to a therapist.
Yeah.
And the whole and that's just bite size. The whole point is never to be back with your therapist.
Exactly. I think the role of a very good therapist is someone that gently takes you on the journey to have you look at your stuff. Because if a therapist just sits there and says, I'll listen to you, come back next week and I'll listen to you tell your story of woe again. And if they're not actually helping you move through that in a caring, loving, but, tough love way, then I'd be asking questions. Are they just, trying to perpetuate a reliance relationship rather than actually really helping you to do the work that you need to do to move forward? So to your point, Deborah, you don't need to come back. You can have a good break.
The whole point of me ever being in therapy is to never be in therapy. Right? To grow and to grow and to grow.
It's not a codependent relationship.
Yeah, with getting messy. If you're, there has to be the point when you're not. That's the aspiration. I don't accept that. It's not. It was certainly not in our teachings, because the whole point is to get to a place of what we call pa'a, strong, unshakable foundation from which you can live, from which you can help, from which you can serve, or whatever it is that you want to do.
What I'm saying is sometimes you have to move through these places to get there.
Of course you do. I agree with that.
Part, you're not doing your work, or you're not having it all together if you experience these places, because they are part of getting to wherever it is that your journey will be taking you. So I'm just conscious about naming it, that if you have a problem, or if you struggle with certain things, then you haven't done enough inner work, because it's not always that simple. It's sometimes life takes you into places for a quite considerate amount of times, like, and that's at least how it always unfolded in my life. There's always a reason for it, and you might want to make it change really quickly, and you might want to get out of it. But there's times when I've traveled with something for, sometimes with years, it has guided me until I sort of came out of it. And then there was something that came with it, and so all I'm trying to just say is to have the compassion about people that are struggling. It's not just about not doing your inner work. It is also part of being human. There's summer, winter, autumn, spring, and it is going in a constant cycle. And so are we as humans. So
I'm not disagreeing with you on that. That's not what I was disagreeing with you on at all. But and I'm saying from our teachings in our training, there is a point where you need to reach a particular point, or else you continue to stay in that same place. You can't stay in the same place because it's too painful. And to stay in that place is a deliberate act of self-harm. That's what that is. And that's really, that's very distressing, both to be in and to watch people go through. So what is our, I'm just getting ready to close down, and, because we've been here for a lot of time. So, what is your guidance? What is your direction or advice to people, Deb, around this whole thing about listening and where you listen from? What do people need to do?
It come back to yourself. Really, really sit with yourself. Start tuning into your own, not just your thoughts, your own feelings, your own, what's my skin doing? What's everything about yourself? Come back to it. Come back to that being disciplined, because that's the foundation.
Yep, healing is a discipline, which is what we were talking about yesterday too, the line in the sand. Either you get to draw it or somebody else will draw it for you. and that's just a whole other level of entanglement again. Yeah. Christina, what's your advice?
Very similar to Deborah's. I think, do the work. You've got to do the work. Until you do the work on yourself, you will always be, I don't want to use the word mishearing, because you're actually hearing from your own place. You're not actually, well, you are mishearing in some regards. I don't want to get caught up in words. Do the work, because all else flows from that. Once you do the work, you will be in a much better position to listen from every essence of your being and for the intention, rather than what you think is being said.
See?
I would maybe suggest, and I'm suggesting that to myself as well, so that's what's coming up for me at the moment, is to really play with these two differences of hearing and listening. Go outside and listen to a bird, to the ocean, to a car that's driving past, to somebody that's talking to you, and then become aware of how it feels and what unfolds if you actually listen to that, and just try to unfold these layers and let yourself fall through them, and let yourself experience it, and see how all of a sudden your relationships, not just with our human family, but with everything, changes if you actually can deepen into that listening.
I think that's brilliant. I think everybody should spend the next week listening with intention as a little exercise.
We do it, because
I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
See how your world changes.
Yeah. So thank you for the
agree.
great questions, Julia, because it was really interesting to look at it that way. Yeah.
And I think it's important for people, that engage with us to really get that the truth of it is we don't agree always with each other, and that's okay. But it's because we're listening to each other that we're having those levels of conversation and sorting out as we're listening. Is that something, is that my stuff there that I'm on shaky ground with? And if I am, how am I going to respond to that? Because that's the point of doing the hana, the inner work, is to know when you're on shaky ground with your stuff and be able to hold that, you know, use our fantastic mental capacity to check it out and then make a different decision. Like, I know that that's my stuff. I know that it's trying to get pinged here and it's pressing my hot buttons, but I'm listening from the greater part of me, which is I've already resolved my stuff because I've done my inner work. And so now my stuff is just my knowing of awareness. And I make the decision not to relate from that place. That's when I feel, you know, it's self-compassion, which is what you're talking about, Bea and Christina, before, that self-compassion. And so that's my message too. Do your inner work. Like Bea said, be curious. You know, we have a saying in our classes, light as a feather. We hold it light as a feather. We be interested, we be curious. It's like, oh, I wonder, oh, what else? And that's what I think we're all saying to you. Do your inner work and be curious about it. It doesn't have, yes, parts of it can be confronting. But if you start doing the inner work, you're prepared for the confrontation when it comes. Thank you for joining us in the guide room. We hope to see you again in 2 weeks' time. Maybe our discussion will be around commitment and what we're committed to. Maybe, I don't know. But stay tuned. Check us out on our Facebook page. It's the SoHAD, the School of Spirituality, Healing and Development at School of the Ancestors. Until next time, a hui ho.
Yachikoham.
Karati.